self-made millionaire Steve Siebold says anyone can hit life's jackpot.
Steve Siebold is a world-class expert on mental toughness training for increasing sales, developing people, and managing change. He's a best-selling author and popular television interview guest on mental toughness for building wealth, getting fit, and excelling in sports.
How does a rich person look at money? What do they see? They see
lots of it.
And just available out there in the universe?
It's everywhere, especially with the recession. We have total chaos in the economy all over the world, world economy.
So they see opportunity.
They see opportunity because there's all these problems. Because where there's chaos, there's opportunity to solve problems, to make money.
Someone said that the rich, having made a lot of money last year in the stock market and maybe some money in the housing market, the rich have an obligation to spend that money to help the economy. And you say?
Why? Why are they obligated? I mean, these people didn't make their money robbing banks. They made their money solving problems.
Because it would be good for the economy.
So is solving problems. I mean, do people want their problems solved or not? If they want their problems solved, you're going to have to look to the innovators, the job producers, the creators.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Steve Siebold.
Hey everyone, it's Steve Siebold, host. Welcome to the Personal Development Podcast. I'm Steve Siebold, and I'm very excited today to have an author, a best-selling author, old friend of mine from way back in the personal development and financial space. His name is Chris Felton. He's written a fantastic new book called Think and Grow You. It's one of the best books of that have been written, I think, in the last 5 or 10 years in personal development. Great stuff, great personal story of coming back from struggling to success. And so I'm very excited to have Chris on the podcast today. Before I bring him on, I want to just to read you a written introduction, just to kind of give you some background on this gentleman, just so I don't miss anything. I've known him for a long time, as I've said, but I want to make sure I don't miss anything. So Chris Felton is an Amazon best-selling author, of course, with this book. Pick this book up. It's on Amazon. I don't know what it costs exactly, but it's not expensive. It's worth it. It's weight in gold, believe me. So he's an Amazon best-selling author with this book, seven-figure entrepreneur. And Chris owns a financial services firm, which he started back in 1999. He leads and trains 200 agents across the United States, and they've helped over 17,000 clients. He's achieved a top 1% status in a company of 60,000 agents. He's been featured in U.S. News and World Report, Market Watch, Yahoo Finance, and NASDAQ, just to name a few. Chris is an international speaker and, as I mentioned, best-selling author. He's committed to sharing his stories and lessons learned from being on the brink of financial ruin and divorce, which he talks about actually extensively in the book. And from there, going on to build a very successful financial services firm in the country. Just as a speaker and author, I've worked with a lot of financial services companies in the U.S. and abroad as well. And I will tell you, Chris's company is one of the most respected out there. Our crew has always been so happy to go and meet with his people and get to know his people over the years, because they're just some of those honest, caring people that are financial experts out there. So I'm really excited to have Chris on the show. So please welcome my old friend, Chris Felton. Hey, Chris.
Steve Siebold. Great to see you, my friend.
Good to see you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Hey, congratulations on the book. I know it's doing well.
Yeah. After we bled it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you did an amazing job telling some of these stories. Let me ask you this to start out with, Chris. Why did you name it Think and Grow You?
Because my life was a mess. My back was against the wall. And after we call it the purse throwing incident, my wife, Marlo, after she threw her purse at me 3 times because she couldn't understand how a CPA and a financial advisor could be $250,000 in credit card debt. And I had to ask her to borrow her money to pay my ex-wife. The alimony and child support I owed. It became very apparent that I had to change my thinking and I had to get focused on growing me, or it was all going to unravel.
Yeah, I know you talk about it in the book, and you're very candid about it. And I think that really pulled me into the book as well. I mean, boy, asking your current wife to finance your ex-wife, that's a bit of a tough place to be in. You say in chapter 1, Chris, one of the things you say I think is really interesting. You say, I'm going to read this word for word to get it right. Our ego traps us between past regrets and fear of the future. Let me say it again just so people can hear this. Our ego traps us between past regrets and fear of the future. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, it's kind of the quote, if you want to plant it, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time is right now. And so our point of power, you probably hear a lot about manifesting your ideal life and all those things. I think people make a big deal out of it, and they make it hard. But really, to change your life, you need to be focused in the present moment on what you're doing and doing the best that you can do with what's in front of you. And I think our attention gets distracted between regrets of the past, fear of the future, and our ego loves everything but the present moment. And so it pulls us in those two directions. And what happens is we can end up repeating the past because of where our focus is. In the past, fear of the future, and we never change our lives because we're never right where we are.
Yeah, isn't it? It's so easy to go back and look at the past and think about some of the stupid things, we've all done, especially when it comes to money.
Yeah.
I look back at some of the things I bought and I think, why did I have to buy that? I mean, there was no reason to buy. I could rent that, or whatever. It's yeah, you're right. It's so easy to get caught up in that. I thought that was a really good opening to the book. In chapter 6, you talked about not settling. Why do you think so many of us end up settling, especially in the richest country in the world? Why do so many of us end up settling for less than we're capable of achieving?
Well, I have a mentor. He's a self-made billionaire. You and I both know him, Steve. And many years ago, he said, "Are you dream flat or are you dream dead?" And I'm like, wow. He's like, and he said, "What are your top 25 dreams?" I'm like, top 25, right? I mean, I have a few. And this is a guy that is in his 70s and he's just after his life more than ever. And it's because he wakes up every morning and he dreams about his ideal life and what he wants in the future, and he gets excited about it. And so I think what happens is if you don't have something pulling you forward, a compelling vision, then it's super easy to settle. And so that was a few years ago, but I started my top 25 dream list then, right? And making sure I'm spending at least a few minutes a day thinking about my ideal life, my future, and that excitement pulls me forward instead of settling, and there's no happiness in settling.
Yeah, that's interesting. Top 25. I don't think I I could have ever named 25 at one time. That's quite a bit. That's a big dream. And I do know you're talking about. And that's very interesting. That makes a big difference. It's interesting how we can fall into the settling piece, and maybe it's a lot of based on who we spend the most time around and how ambitious they are, I suppose. One of the things that really perked me up, I guess, because I'm turning 60 this year, so it's freaking me out a little bit. But you know how it is as you get older, it's you start thinking about that. But you talk about in the book, you reference age discrimination. And why do you think so many of us, once we hit 50, we think the best of our lives are behind us?
Well, yeah, I think it's how we're programmed, right? And as you know, Steve, you're an expert in this, and we get programmed as a very little kid about certain things, and then society programs us, and we get pounded into our mentality that 50's old and 60's old, and when I hit, I'll be 53 in a couple of weeks, but when I hit 50 a few years ago, it was happening to me. I was like, oh my God, it was actually the first time I connected to my mortality. And I just started having conversations with my friends and then the study that I have in the book, it's like, no, man, your best years are ahead of you, right? Like the number of CEOs that are over the age of 60, the average age of a pope is in their 70s. I mean, really the best is ahead of us for lots of reasons. And so I was talking to a really good friend, man, very successful, just crushed it in his business. And, he's turning 55 and he's retiring from his first job, and talking to him, it was like, he was like, oh yeah, I don't know what's going to happen to me. And I don't know. I mean, he sounded old, right? And if you saw him, you'd be like, dude, you look great. He's in great shape. But he was sounding old. And I shared the study that I have in the book, and it changed his life, that, his life isn't over. And so just that programming, and it's garbage, right? And we just got to make sure we don't buy into it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's so easy to get lost in that too, because I know I'm turning 60 in a few months, but when I turned 50, that was like, I'm 50 years old. This is ridiculous. My dad's 50. He was much older than that, but at the time. But I mean, you just think that's, and then I look in the mirror and go, yeah, it's about right. So, but it does sort of bring you down that path. It's interesting stuff, but you're right. It's so much programming. One of the things you talk about, again, I want to show the book to everyone. I totally recommend this book to everyone. I've told so many people about this, but in chapter 9, you talk about quitter, and I want to show the audience this. You talk about quitter's relief. Can you talk about what that means exactly?
Yeah, I mean, one of our common heroes between the two of us, Steve, is Bob Proctor. And Bob Proctor, I think I probably put in that chapter. He's got a video out there called The Terror Barrier. And it's this barrier that we have right when we're about ready to bust through a level that psychologically seems to be scary. We will often retreat, right? And I've learned this from you, Steve, in your books. Coaching people, when we're coaching people, our job isn't to do it for them. Our job is to prepare them for the psychological battle. I think this is your words. Prepare them for the psychological battle that they must go through in order for their dreams to come true. And so what happens is just that you're stepping into a new world, and you're stepping into uncomfort, and you're leaving your comfort zone, and your ego's not your amigo, right? And it's screaming at you that this is painful, this is going to be horrible, and it's a lie. And much like lifting a heavy weight for a minute or so, and then letting go of that weight and feeling that relief of not having that pressure, that's what happens when you're about ready to bust through your comfort zone. And instead of busting through that terror barrier, we often pull backwards and we quit because we want to get that initial relief. And that initial relief is great, but it's a lie because you didn't keep your word. Your confidence is going to crash. Your self-esteem is going to crash. And so that initial sugar high of quitting and that feeling of putting the weight down is great, but it doesn't last. And that's why I say quitter's relief is an absolute lie. Don't fall for it.
Yeah, I found that to be really interesting. I don't think I've ever read that in any personal development book about that initial feeling of quitting, and then you have that relief, and then all of a sudden, it backfires on you. One of the things I think that's really grabbed a lot of people that I've recommended your book to over the last several months is you're very candid about your shortcomings, for one, which you don't typically see in a personal development book. We always tell everybody how great we are and all that, and we probably ought to talk more about our shortcomings. And you did a masterful job of this. That's one of my favorite parts of the book. And notably, in the context of shortcomings, you talk about how you interacted with your ex-wife, her new husband, and your kids, who are living most of the time at that point with your ex-wife and her new husband. What was that? I know that had to be a really, really tough situation, probably for everyone involved. What was the greatest lesson you learned in the process of navigating this interfamily, situation?
I think there's two parts. One was my coach that I hired for 4.5 years, because I was $250,000 in debt. I was struggling. I was a financial services entrepreneur in the middle of the Great Recession, and being a former I call it recovered CPA. I thought there was some strategy thing that I was missing. And no, it was these mental leaks. And our first coaching session, he was like, okay, your homework assignment is to forgive your ex-wife. And I'm like, what? He's like, if you don't forgive her, you're going to be broke the rest of your life. And I didn't fight him on that, Steve, but I had to be coachable to him. And so, in the chapter in forgiveness in the book, I walked through a process that literally transformed my whole relationship with her in a matter of weeks, really. It was transformational. And the blessings that have come from that is just unbelievable with my kids now at 23 and 20. But then she remarried a guy, and my kids were little, and, another man was raising my kids because I lived in Denver and my kids lived in Atlanta. And so my coach taught me a very powerful concept called acceptance. And I didn't get it, but, my kids are being raised by another man. They're going to love him more. They're going to do, all these things that I was fearful of, and resisting, right? And that's where people live today. They resist what is, and they resist what's happening. And I was resisting everything in my life, and I kept recreating more garbage. And he's like, you know what? You need to accept. I'm like, why would I accept this? This is horrible. He said, this was life-changing for me. He's like, you don't need to love it, but you need to stop hating it. Just accept it. Accept it. You can't change it. It is what it is. And then get clear on what you want that relationship to be and what do you want to do about it next. And that's where he kept me for years as I was spinning out of my disaster, was what do you want and what's next? And what do you want and what's next? And what do you want and what's next? What do you want and what's next? And acceptance is really the only place where you can create a different life. But most people try to change their lives from this state of resistance, and it doesn't work. And problems and issues stay in people's lives for years. And I'm like, why? Because you resist. You're trying to change. You're trying to get to second base and keep your foot on first base. It's never going to happen.
Yeah, I found that to be really. I thought it took a lot of courage for you to write the things that you wrote, and I think that's why the book is connecting with so many people. One of the reasons it is because you were so honest about that. One of the things you mentioned was, and I don't think it was in the intro, but I know you started out when you graduated from college. You were with Arthur Andersen, one of the big 8 accounting firms. Very prestigious job, right? As an accountant, you can't really get much higher than that. And then you went out on your own eventually as an entrepreneur, financial entrepreneur. And then, but as you mentioned a second ago, you were $250,000 in debt. And you also mentioned in the book, you talk about the fact that, people are surprised that a financial person can be in debt. And I asked this question just because you and I both know that there's so many people out there, people that are, say between 40 and old, let's say 40 and up, who are really feeling pretty bad about themselves because for one reason or another, they either are in debt or they don't have any money saved for retirement. They're afraid of the future because of that. Their self-esteem is suffering. I hear from these people like you do all the time. They're always asking for help or advice. And I just wanted you to, if you would, just take a second and talk about how you pulled yourself out of that and how you think other people can do the same. Is it possible to pull yourself out? And if someone's 50 years old or 60 years old, they don't have any retirement, is there some hope that they can have that they can recover in time?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I'm studying, and Steve, you probably are too, just some of the stuff that's coming out, on longevity and, what AI is doing. And there's some estimates that, we make another 10 or 15 years. For every year that we live, another year could get added, right? It's pretty amazing where this could all be going. And so absolutely, I think that you can turn it around, and I see people do it all the time. It's just this, for me, it was what woke me up was, my coach was like, who's paying the price for you staying where you are? Because we can get familiar with a pretty crappy life, right? And, my kids are paying a price. My wife was paying a price. I was paying a heavy price. And so, the pain of staying here and living a pathetic life versus what I wanted my life to be, there was a pretty big gap there that got me pretty motivated. And so if that's you, do what I did and just sit down and be like, okay, like who's paying the price? I mean, Steve, you teach objective reality, right? It's the number one skill of a world-class thinker. And, what do I really want, right? What do I want the next 5 or 10 years to really look like? And not only what, but why? And what's the feeling that I want to have? And how do I want to feel about myself? And who's paying the price for it? And so what happens, most people just avoid doing the hard work of thinking about, what do I want? Who's paying the price for where I am? And really, I call it, fueling up a Ferrari. If you're trying to go I'm in Denver, if you're trying to go from Denver to Aspen and you have a Ferrari and it's got no gas in the tank or it's not charged, right? It's not going anywhere. And so you have to fill the tank, and it is those reasons to move forward. And so what happens is I filled my car and my vehicle with some pretty big, compelling reasons that got me to move. And it was the price that others were paying and the compelling, future. And that got me unstuck.
Yeah, I think you're right on track with that. And I think you're smart to say that so much of it is the why. I mean, because there's so many ways to how, and especially in the context of making money. I mean, I know people get mad sometimes when we say, well, it's not so hard to make, it's hard to keep money than it is to invest money than it is to make money. And sometimes people get mad about that. So they say, well, that might be for you guys or a certain group of people or whatever, but it's not for me. But I think if your why is big enough, you're probably going to find a way to sock away money, because a lot of people that don't make a lot of money, as you know, they actually save a lot of money and they invest well. They do really well. I mean, a school teacher can come out a millionaire if they save their money and they invest their money properly. So it's sad because so many people are struggling, of course. And when there's so much out there, it's tough to see. One of the things you talk about in chapter 22, Chris, I thought was really interesting. You said, don't label things as good or bad. And can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's, there's a chapter that I write on judgment, and, judgment is public enemy number one, right? It's just judging ourselves, judging others. I mean, right now, you see it all day long. I mean, just judgment's at an all-time high, right? In this country, it's crazy. And judgment is the number one form of self-sabotage. And, when things happen, just like, going in reverse, and I've had a pretty challenging year this year. It would have been really easy for me in those situations to go, that's good, that's bad. That's good, that's bad. That's good, that's bad. And, and I tell a story in my book on this chapter of, a situation that on the surface looked horrible. But when I was going through what do I want and what's next, and, I had a phone conversation with Marlo because we had one of our biggest agents quit, and she's like, oh my God, he quit and he moved out of the office. And, we were struggling so bad financially. And she's like, what are we going to do? This is bad. And I'm like, that hasn't worked for me, right? That labeling it as bad hasn't worked for me. I'm going to suspend judgment of whether it's good or bad, right? And it's the whole event plus a response equals an outcome. And so the event was what it was. My response to it was transformational to my business and what I did. And I lay out in the book what I did. And the outcome I got was better, infinitely better for me and everybody involved than the initial, bad thing that happened. So it's just not judging situations as, good or bad. Often it's bad. So.
Yeah, you never really know long term if something's good or bad, right? It's an old story, about the boy that wants the pony, and he gets the pony and everyone says, "Oh, it's wonderful. Isn't this great? The boy has a pony." And then he falls off and breaks his leg of the pony, and they say, "Oh, isn't it terrible? He got the pony. He wouldn't have the broken leg if he had the pony," that whole thing. And then he gets drafted, and then there's a whole storyline about that. But you never really know. It's interesting, isn't it, how we kind of talk our way. We kind of create our own reality by the words we use with ourselves. I've always found that interesting. It's like you see the world completely differently based on the way you talk to yourself.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're creating our own reality. Like you mentioned Bob Proctor earlier. Of course, Bob loved to talk about that. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. You mentioned forgiveness earlier in our interview, Chris. How can we become, and you have a whole chapter devoted, I believe it's chapter 24. You talk about forgiveness at length. And I hope people read it. As a matter of fact, I want to show the book again while I'm thinking about it. I really highly recommend Chris's book, Think and Grow You. Get it on Amazon. You will not forget this book. I promise. If you get this book and read it, and it's a fast read, it's really entertaining. He bleeds on paper. That's what I tell people. I said, this book is blood on paper. It's true, and it will change your life. It really will. But you'll never forget it. Chapter 24 is forgiveness, and you talk at length about that. How can we all become more forgiving? Not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I talk. I mean, when I do workshops and I do speaking, I mean, I make sure that it's one of the main topics I focus on, because I think people want peace. And, they want peace. I mean, it's what they want to have certain, level of comfort so they can have peace and peace of mind. But you can never have it if you don't forgive. And just, that exercise I share in the book about what my coach taught me to do to forgive my ex-wife. And, and it's amazing. I'll end a workshop or a talk on forgiveness, and I'll cover all sorts of different, topics when I'm teaching, Steve, and I'll come off stage and people be, lined up to talk to me, and they're like, what are you talking about? My ex-wife, this, my ex-husband, my parents, my this, my that, it's so challenging. But my coach is like, what's the price of you not forgiving? And so I have a great exercise in the book, right, about it. And there's lots of different resources out there. But, I have a friend, he's a holistic healer. I mean, he's unbelievable. He's cured people from cancer, and he cured himself from cancer. I'm like, what's the root issue of the cancer? And he's like, it's lack of forgiveness. He's like, every single person I've cured, I've walked them through how to forgive, and they free themselves from cancer. Anyway, Steve, you and I could do a whole show on it, but you just have to make it a priority, right? And like my coach said, I wanted to change my life. I had compelling reasons. I thought it was going to be my strategy or something I had to learn. And he was like, no, you got to forgive your ex-wife. So the exercise in the book helps.
Yeah, that's profound. I agree with you. It's easy to talk about it and much more difficult to do it. Do you think the reason that we don't forgive as often and as easily as we should is it the ego that gets in the way?
Yeah. I mean, there's another chapter in the book, it's called your need to be right will cost you your life. Right. And just this, and like I said, we're watching it all over our world, man. Everybody's got to be right, and they're wrong, and they're this and they're that, and judgment. And it's just, it's never ending. And it's just so destructive. Right. And I think somewhere else in the book, I talk about the 3 R's, right? Resentment, resistance, revenge, the most destructive thought pattern on the planet, resentment, resistance, revenge. And so you have to stop the madness. There's just way too much suffering that comes from judgment, lack of forgiveness, just those things. And it's, at the end of the day, it's it's not worth it.
What do you say to people, Chris, around this topic? Because as you say, this is a very important thing. What do you say to people? They say, well, this person, whether it's their ex-wife or ex-husband or parents, or as you say, kids, or, whatever it is, friends, that person doesn't deserve to be forgiven. What do you say to those people?
Well, who's suffering? Right? I mean, who's the one that's suffering? You. Right? And I mean, I talk about in the book, I mean, one of my, goals of my personal development journey is to create a peaceful mind. And, we all go through life and we all suffer, at some level, but if I can control this, the removal of the suffering, I want to do it. Cause it's just like my coach, he said, would you rather be right or be at peace? I'm like, I'd rather be at peace. Well, good. And that was a good choice, and the ripple effect, because you also don't know your lack of forgiveness. Like if you really connect the dots, who else is paying the price around you? Right. And then we have the whole topic of forgiving ourselves. I mean, I had to do that. I mean, I blew up that first marriage. I mean, it wasn't her fault. I created the whole disaster. But my lack of forgiveness on me was bleeding into everything else, right? My lack of focus on I wasn't anywhere where because I was in the past and beating myself up and all those things. And so it's not worth holding on to it because, like I said, my friend, he's a healer, can kill you. Right? Lack of forgiveness can kill you. So is it worth that? I don't think it's worth the suffering and the pain and your ultimate demise. It's a lie.
I think you're right. One of the other things you talk about, I think that along these lines that, is you talk about peace of mind, of course. And, I think at least for me, as I've gotten older over the years, that it didn't even mean anything to me as a kid or maybe as a young person. But as you get older, the peace of mind thing turns out to be the most important thing ever. Yeah, it seems like if you have peace in your life, and it's a good place to be for sure compared to the alternative. But one of the things that kind of goes along the line with this, Chris, is the idea of giving. And you talk about this in the book as well. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of giving and the impact it's had on you in your life?
Yeah. It's a pretty big topic. I mean, I was stuck, I was broke. And one of the reasons was all the attention was focused on me. All the attention was, what's in it for me? What can I get? And the problem with that is often fed, never satisfied, right? I mean, it's a insatiable, bottomless pit of me. And what happens is it never, ever satisfies. And it's just, people are searching for the stuff to make them happy, and you'll never experience it. And when I started getting focused, I remember one time I was talking to my coach and I was whining and crying about something. And he's like, God, man, just go serve in a soup kitchen or something, would you? Like, he was so frustrated at how selfish I was. And when he was like, you need to get intentional about giving. It doesn't need to be a big thing, but just, in your morning routine that I talk about in my book, just like set the intention of serving and giving. And man, it's unbelievable. Right. And I think I talk about in the book, like, people that are chronically ill or terminally ill, like when they go help somebody that's in a similar situation, like their pain, they get relief. I mean, it's just powerful. I call it, throwing out boomerangs, right? Hopefully it's not a poop covered boomerang, right? What you throw out comes back. And so there's just this natural flow in the universe of giving and receiving and giving and receiving. It's kind of how things, work out. And so, but you got to get intentional about it. Right. And that's what I do every morning is, what can I do to add value? What can I do to bring value? And I'm always happiest when I feel like I'm growing and I'm contributing to others. And that's actually the only way you'll find true fulfillment. You'll never get it in stuff. You've experienced this, right? You'll never get it from stuff. You'll never get it from, a certain level of income, net worth. Past that, it's the law of diminishing returns. It's better to give and grow. That's where you get fulfilled.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I never really got that, in the early days, because you just think, because we don't have anything hardly, you think, well, if I get this car, this house, or this, whatever thing or material or money or whatever, then that'll be it. Then I'll be in the promised land, then I'll be happy. And then, then you have some success and you get some of these things and you realize, well, that didn't really do it at all. But, it's kind of a quick, like eating a chocolate bar, like it's great for a few seconds and then it's stomach ache half the time, okay. Yeah. And I remember, the self-made millionaires I've interviewed over the years in the early days, they would tell me that. And I was like, yeah, it's easy for you to say you're rich and I'm poor. And, so I always thought they were just making it up. But then, then as the time went on, you interview these people that can, that can buy their own island and stuff like that, just have obscene wealth. And they talk about exactly what you said. They say, hey, you want to really be happy, go out and help someone. I was listening, interesting enough, Chris, this morning I was listening to a study. It's in a book, and it was a study that was done recently at the University of North Carolina on altruism. And they said that what they found was oxytocin is released when you're in the body, when you're helping someone else do something, or you're giving something, you're doing something, philanthropic or in that, that category. And someone observing this giving also gets that release of oxytocin, which makes people feel good, which is pretty interesting. So there's literally a chemical reaction to giving.
Yeah.
And throw it back out. It's pretty interesting, so no wonder we feel so good.
Well, yeah. And it's, because I get intentional about it. It doesn't always turn out right. But so I just got back from seeing my kids. My youngest is doing an internship in Tennessee, and my oldest flew in, and we had a great time together and we created some memories and all this, but I'm in the airport with my oldest, and this young lady comes up. She's from Mississippi and she's enrolled in, she's going to boot camp. Never been on an airplane, Steve. And she walks up to me. She's like, I don't know where I'm going. Can you help me? And I took her to her gate. Like, I'll never forget that the rest of my life. Right? Sure. I mean, just so this great trip of fun and golf and all these cool things I did with my kids and dinners and all this stuff, which there's some memories there, but I'll never forget the look on her face. She was helpless. She needed help. She had no idea where she was going, and she was grateful. And I felt 10 feet tall after that. So there is something
relatively little. I mean, you travel all the time. I mean, the airports are a second home to you, like they were for me for so many years. And it's like, so it's not like a big deal to you, but to her, it was monumental. She's terrified. Yeah.
I'm like, have you ever flown on a plane? She's like, no, sir. I'm like, all right, let's go, and it took 5 minutes.
Right. But you'll never forget it. It's very interesting the way the mind works, isn't it?
It's crazy.
It really is. Something, it's crazy stuff. One of the things you talk about in the book that I think, again, let me show the book to everybody, is the concept of coaching. I know you're a big believer in coaching. You've been coached, you've had coaches, you're a coach to thousands of, financial entrepreneurs. So you've done it for a long time. Talk about the importance of coaching. And if you would, touch on, why you think some people think, not in the personal development space, but sometimes people outside personal development, at least as I've experienced it, kind of make fun of coaching. They say, well, coaching, that's kind of people don't really need to be coached unless they're learning how to play the violin or learning how to play golf or something like that. But we're talking about success, what I call success coaching anyway, or life coaching, whatever you want to label it, why people kind of sometimes make fun of that or think it's not really that valuable, and how it's been valuable to you.
Well, I mean, going back to your, one of my favorite topics that you coach on is objective reality, right? And I'm going through this, with this newer firm I've been with for almost a year, and I'm bumping up against some stuff, and I'm like, I think I was delusional at my old opportunity, right? Like, as you often coach on, Steve, like, delusion's nasty, and it's super easy to fall into delusion, and that's what I've been waking up to, is I'm like, you're really not as good as you think you are, right? And that objective reality. And so I'm self-coaching a little bit, but I'm also getting a lot of feedback from other coaches. And so I think the gist is just, we have blind spots, and we can't see our own blind spots. And if somebody is getting the results that we want and they care for us, I don't know how you go to the next level without it. I don't think you can get there on your own. And, my coach was financially independent. He was financially free. And, why not take the coaching, and why not just shave years, if not decades, off your journey? I mean, he worked with me for 4.5 years. He knew when to hug me. He knew when to kick me. He cared about me. I loved him. Passed away, a couple of years ago, but it wouldn't have happened without him. I mean, you've coached me, Steve, on things, and if someone's getting the results that you want, why would you not listen to them? Like, it makes zero sense to me. And I think the big thing is just avoiding delusion.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I never get when people, make fun of the coaching thing. I'm like, the mentorship and coaching are like, that's like the key to life to me. It's like, why do like Brian, our friend Brian Tracy likes to say, you're never going to live long enough, as only Brian Tracy can say in that way. You'll never live long enough to learn it all. So why not just cut your learning curve, like you just said as well, and get someone who knows how to do it. I take guitar lessons on Monday, and I've been playing guitar for a long time. But people ask me why I take lessons. I said, well, because my teacher, his band used to open for AC/DC. Like, the guy's a world-class guitar player. He's forgotten more about this topic than I'm ever going to know. And I've been playing for 50 years. He's so far ahead of me. I'll never catch up, which is fine. But I mean, in 15 minutes, he can give me information that would take me forever to learn on my own. It's why people don't take coaching more seriously, and I don't know why, but it certainly is a big thing.
Pride is nasty.
You think it's pride and ego?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've had to work hard on it, right? Especially, we talk about approval addiction and all these things. Like, I mean, that was really like, oh, you're telling me I'm doing something wrong, like taking that personally,
right?
It just, yeah, can crush you.
Yeah, I guess you sort of have to play the fool, because, or that's not the good way to look at it probably, but you have to be the beginner, the student, and the better student you are, the more humble you are, the more open you are to the coaching. Obviously, the more you're going to get out of it. But I guess it's so easy to, it's so easy to, like you say, get your pride and your ego in the way, and it just hurts us. It doesn't hurt anyone else. It's correct. It's interesting. Yeah. In chapter 39, Chris, you make the distinction between a project and a problem. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, this is one of those game changer moments with my coach once again. And, I had a financial problem, being $250,000 in debt and having a horrific cash flow. And he's like, dude, you no longer have a financial problem. You have a financial project. And the difference is, when we have problems, we're like, oh my God, woe is me. It's Mount Everest. I can't, problems stay in our lives forever, but we view projects differently, right? If we're going to build a deck, that's a project, right? And we might, if we're into that, we build the deck, and it takes time, and we're going to bump up against obstacles and things aren't going to work, but we have this vision of this deck that we want. And so we're going to see all that through, and go through the obstacles, go through the pain, because we have a compelling image of a deck that we want to have for our family. And so we just see projects differently than problems. And so I've talked to a lot of people about this. I'm like, you don't have a problem, you have a project. And, you know, I'm working on a new project now with my new business, and with that mentality, I'll just see it through, and eventually the project will get done. But if I view it as a problem, I might not even start.
Yeah, I love that in the book. It's a great distinction because, yeah, like you say, problem is, oh boy, you know, the stress just hits you as soon as you hear the word, but project seems like something maybe that might end up being positive, you know, eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's just the way we use the language. It's too bad they don't teach this in school, Chris. It's
yeah.
Great thing.
That's true.
In chapter 42, you talk about respecting money. Now you're a self-made millionaire. How has your view about money and wealth evolved over the course of your adult life?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty significant because, you know, I hired my coach because of you know, I wanted to change my money situation because it was pretty bad. And right when I hired him, there's a Billy Graham quote I mentioned in the book, and a lot of people don't know this quote, but it's one of my favorites from him. And he said, once you get your attitude straight around money, it helps straighten out every area of your life. Powerful quote. And what that means is, you know, I had to forgive my ex-wife. I had to practice forgiveness. I had to stop judging things so much. I had all the things I talk about in the book. By me focusing on leveling up my financial situation, it really freed me up. And I have better energy at 53 than I did at 33. And I think it's because I've let go of a lot of garbage, right? So, but the respecting of money, right? Because our first book, Couples Money, came as a result of our challenge. And, you know, Marla went out and interviewed, you know, self-made millionaires and billionaires, and they, you know, they had respect for money. And it's not a love of money. Unfortunately, there's a lot of broke Christians out there because they don't, right? Money's the second most mentioned topic in the Bible because they have a bad relationship with money because it's viewed as evil. It's viewed as this, it's viewed as that. It's not necessarily love of, but it's a respect. And once, you know, they don't go, oh, it's just $5. Like every dollar is important. Every dollar is respected. And because of their level of respect for it, they become wealthy. And, you know, and my friend said, you know, if money was your friend, would money hang out with you? Well, if I don't respect my friend's not going to hang out with me, right? If it's just like, oh, it's just money. Oh, it's not important. Oh, it's just $5. Oh, it's just my friend. That relationship's not going to last very long. So it's changed significantly. I have a healthy respect for money, but you know, I don't worship it. It's important. Oxygen's important. I don't worship oxygen. I need oxygen, right? Money's important. I don't worship it, but I respect it. And so most people that struggle don't have a healthy respect for money, or they have a real bad relationship with money.
Yeah, I love the respect piece because I think that's the right word. I remember I was interviewing a self-made billionaire actually in Palm Beach and Boynton Beach, where we lived. We used to live during the winter, and we lived in the same neighborhood, and one of his places, of course. And I said, hey, I really appreciate the time. It was the first time I had met him. And I said, kid, I want to take you out for a steak. And there was a steakhouse down the street in Boynton, a pretty nice one. And I said, I'll take you to, I forget the name of the steakhouse, but it wasn't a Ruth's Chris, but it was something like a Ruth's Chris. And he said, oh, that's too expensive. He goes, Golden Corral's right down the street. We save $2 if we go before 3:00. I started laughing. I go, seriously? He goes, yeah, you save $2. Let's go now. Why? We don't need a steak. I can get a steak anytime. Let's go to Golden Corral. We went to Golden Corral for like $10 or something. And I thought, this guy's a billionaire. He's one of the richest people in the world. And I thought, okay, that talk about respect for money. And we were laughing about it at lunch. And he said, hey, every dollar counts, man. He goes, that's how you build wealth. He goes, every dollar counts. It's, you know, you don't get too crazy about it. He said, these people that throw their money around are stupid. He said, you got to be frugal, be smart. And I'll never forget that, because I was really shocked. And that happened actually not in that exact way, but so many times over the years. So I love that chapter 42 in the book about respecting money. I think that's something we ought to teach as well. Chris, where can people buy the book? And then here, let me again show the book so people can see what it looks like. Think and Grow You, Chris Felton, awesome book. Where's the best place for them to get it, Chris?
Amazon or my website, chrisfelton.me. Yep.
chrisfelton.me.
Yep.
Or Amazon. Okay, great. Any final thoughts, either on the book or for people that, there's so many, as you know, Chris, there's so many people out there struggling. You and I have been very fortunate. We've had a lot of great mentorship over the years, like a lot of people you and I work with. But there's so many people out there that are just having a tough time. They're scared. They're struggling with money. You're a self-made millionaire. Any advice you would pass on to people who are trying to, get out of the muck and, get ahead?
Yeah. I mean, the preeminent law, there's lots of books written and there's lots of personal growth and development. And Steve, you've talked to, millions of people, and the preeminent law in personal growth and development is a law of growth. And it's what you focus on expands, and it's crazy. And your life's going to turn out based on what you repetitively tell yourself and what, the images you have in your mind. And so, for me, it was just super important to sit down and just, okay, what am I focused on? What is that creating? And it was creating problems. It was creating debt. It was creating all sorts of issues. And I just had to do the work to get my compelling vision crafted, to look at it frequently, to see it, to image, to visualize it, and to really get a better understanding of what I was focused on. And then the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. So that whole thing of, what do I want? Most people can't answer that, and they wonder why their life doesn't work. What do I want? I was clear on that. I'm clear on that today as I've ever been. And what's the next thing I need to do? And that became my focus. What do I want? What's next? What do I want? What's next? What do I want? What's next? And it served me very well.
I think that's great advice, Chris. Just getting the clarity around all these things and whatever you have to do. And like you say, growth is the key. Chris, I really appreciate you coming on again. The book is Think and Grow You. Get it on Amazon. Chris Felton. Awesome. Thanks for taking time, Chris, to talk to us. I really appreciate it. It's great.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.